Today we're talking about pagans, witches, and Satanists. Oh my. And I think the reason that somebody asked me to sort of look into this particular topic is because we find that a lot of our young people, and when I say young people, I'm talking about high school age, college age individuals, who more and more of them are beginning to say, well, I'm a pagan or I'm a Wiccan or something like that. And we're kind of wondering, well, what exactly does that mean? Should we be concerned? So we'll talk about pagans, witches, and Satanists. Oh my. Are pagans, witches, and Satanists in your church? And my answer to that is, I hope so. I can't think of a better place for them, right? This kind of refers to what's going on with Pastor Greg Locke, and he's claiming there are witches in his church. He even claims that they cast spells upon him and make him sick. I'm like, well, maybe if you wore your mask, you wouldn't have to worry about it. All right, so let's talk about what is a pagan. What exactly is a pagan? So the Christians of the first century used the term pagan to describe anybody who was not a Christian and not Jewish. So pretty much you had Christians, you had Jews, you had pagans. That was just sort of like everyone else. So if we were to compare that to our census form today, it would be all the others. Pretty much anybody who wasn't either Christian or Jewish, that's what a pagan was. The Latin word, or the Latin root for pagan, actually means rural, like living out in the countryside, which pretty much reflects the spread of urbanized Christianity. As Christianity began to take hold in the ancient world, it started in the large city centers like Rome, like Ephesus, like Corinth, and then it spread out. And so the idea that people were not Christians were sort of confined to the people out in the rural countryside who had not quite received the word of God yet. So they just called them pagans. It's almost like calling somebody a hick or a hillbilly or something like that. In our current times, when a person identifies as pagan, they can mean a very wide variety of practices and beliefs. They may also mean not a Christian. There are some of our younger folks who are just like, I'm a pagan, I'm not a Christian. They're kind of using it in the very old traditional sense of the word. But if we're talking about really the neo-paganism, then we're talking about a wide variety of practices and beliefs. So what's a pagan? Let's talk about neo-paganism, because that's really what we're talking about today. Generally, it can be a mix of any of these. Paganism sort of kind of is very eclectic and syncretic. It sort of just kind of mixes and matches a lot of different things. So you might have Roman polytheism. In other words, they're worshiping the old Roman gods. So that's your Zeus and the rest of them, actually Jupiter and the rest of them. Roman polytheistic reconstructionism, trying to recreate what the old Roman religion was. It can be Hellenism, which is trying to recreate the system of worship under Alexander the Great. Slavic native faith, Celtic reconstructionists, that's your Druids. Okay, paganism, heathenry. And this one kind of got to me, Discordianism. Some people who identify as pagans identify as Discordians. And I put a little question mark after that one because when it comes to Discordianism, we're not sure if that's an actual religion or just a satire of a religion. It's sort of one of those things we kind of trace it back to. We think its origin may have been the writer Robert Anton Wilson. We're not sure if it's an actual real religion or just a parody of a religion. Sort of like the flying spaghetti monster and Pastafarianism. And then of course Wicca. Wicca falls under paganism. And we'll talk about Wicca in a little bit. You might have paleo-paganism. Instead of neo-paganism, you might have paleo-paganism. And that's not pagans who are on the paleo diet. All right, that's something completely different. All right, that's your original polytheistic nature-centered faiths. So that would be pre-Hellenistic Greek paganism. So before Alexander the Great and how he altered the religion, they're trying to get back to sort of like the original or pre-imperial Roman religion. So again, we're talking about the old Roman gods, but this is before they started worshiping the Caesars as gods. Pre-migration period Germanic paganism, that's before they sort of had contact with the Roman Empire, and Celtic polytheism. So when we're talking about paganism, it can be a whole huge category. I remember one time I had somebody in one of my classes tell me, oh, I'm a pagan. I'm like, really? Which of the gods do you worship? I don't know. Right? I'm like, okay, so you're just kind of using paganism as not Christian rather than you actually have some deity that you're worshiping. But sometimes that's what happens. There's meso-paganism. So instead of neo or paleo, there's meso. Meso, of course, means middle. Okay, and these are your Aboriginal Americans. So that would be some of our Native American religions, your Aboriginal Australians, your Norse Viking paganisms. So a lot of the mythology that comes from that. This is also your Haitian voodoo, which is also a syncretic religion, oftentimes mixing sort of the pagan religion with Catholicism. Santeria, which is practiced in some of the Latin American countries, and traditional British Wicca. And again, we'll talk about Wicca in a little bit. So again, paganism oftentimes is, as I said, it's both eclectic in that it takes a little bit from here and there, and syncretic in that it mixes things together. So defining paganism can actually be very difficult. There's a variety of beliefs, there's a variety of practices that would all be considered pagan. People identify with paganisms at various levels as well. So again, like that student that I ran into that, I'm a pagan, okay, he's identifies as a pagan, but he doesn't really practice paganism. We have some people who are into the practices. We still have people who dress up like druids and go out, dance around Stonehenge and things like that. They're a little more identified with it than others. But, again, are they building temples to Diana? We don't know. Are there people who go out there to the temple of Diana and worship? Yes. So again, people identify at various different levels with paganism. Okay, so how many pagans are there? Well, if you use the old system of if you're not Jewish and not Christian, then there's a whole bunch. Okay, but can we actually count them? Can we say, okay, how many people identify as pagan? Can we get an accurate number? Well, first off, the 2021 census data is unavailable to us. That particular census was so messed up that we're like, we haven't straightened it out yet. Okay. And generally, paganism is just grouped with other religions. So it's kind of hard to break it out from all these other religions. How many is a guess, though? We do know that it is increasing. The last census numbers that we have in 2011 indicated that it was on its rise. If you go to adherence.com, they estimate there's approximately 3 million pagans worldwide. 3 million. Who practice either neopaganism or the mesopaganism or the paleopaganism. So they estimate about 3 million pagans worldwide. And it seems to be on the increase as far as we can tell from the 2011 census. All right, so I need to kind of take a little sidestep here back to Western esotericism. What's Western esotericism? Very important in the development of a lot of the paganism, modern paganism, neopaganism, a lot of the new Wicca movement, the Church of Satan, those kind of things. Western esotericism was a movement that's very old. It's been around for a long time. It's a wide range of ideas and movements in Western civilization from late antiquity, which would be anywhere between the 3rd to the 7th century, to modern times from the 16th century onward. So there have always been various, what we would call esoteric traditions that have been sort of taught, passed on, practiced at different levels. And they can represent a whole lot of different groups that had, some of them had secret teachings, some of them had rituals and practices. Some of them were sort of like religions, but not really. They were just more teachings like Gnosticism. But it's a movement that went on for a long period of time and continues to go on. In fact, many of their texts that were written during this time are still studied today. Included in all that is Hermeticism, Gnosticism, Neo-Pythagoreanism, Neoplatonism, and Christian Kabbalah and Christian Theosophy. So Christian theosophy, that kind of goes back to the 1800s. Hermeticism goes far back, even further than that. Okay, supposedly Hermeticism is based upon the writings of the god Hermes, which would be Mercury if you're thinking about it, the guy with a winged helmet and winged shoes and flies around, messenger of the gods. Okay, so we can see a lot of this. We know Gnosticism existed at the time of Christ and continued on. So these are all these sort of esoteric traditions. Oftentimes they had some kind of secret teaching that they were passing on to their adherents. Rosicrucianism, Freemasonry, the Theosophical Society, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, all of these were part of this Western esotericism. Some of you may have heard about these folks. Oftentimes, if you're reading things like the Da Vinci Code, and you're into all those conspiracy theories, then you're going to hear a lot about the Rosicrucians and the Freemasons, how they're part of this esoteric conspiracy, right? This is the stuff that Nicolas Cage is chasing after in National Treasure, whatever that particular movie is called, right? This is all that stuff that, Tom Hanks and all his movies about the Da Vinci Code. This is all the stuff he's chasing after, the Freemasons and the Rosicrucians and all of them. All right, so these guys appear in a lot of conspiracy theories, but they've been around for a long time, and oftentimes they're regurgitating the same old supposed secret teachings that have gone on. The Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, that's Aleister Crowley and kind of his crowd and those folks. Modern paganism and Wicca develop out of the Western esotericism. So what we call NeoPaganism and what we call Wicca sort of comes from all these various groups that have been around for a while with their secret teachings and their practices and rituals. What is a witch? Oh, this is Pastor Greg Locke that I was talking about before. He's in Tennessee. Tennessee, what is going on with you nowadays? I just don't understand you guys. Okay, Tennessee preacher Greg Locke says demons told him names of witches in his church. First off, should you even believe a demon if they tell you something? Don't they have like this tendency to lie to you? And what are you doing talking to demons anyway? I don't understand this. If you're talking to demons, doesn't that make you a necromancer? Which is actually like sort of the black arts of Wicca, but never mind. Anyway, he's talking to demons, and he told us that he learned the names of witches within his church. He's not talking about election fraud anymore. I guess that wasn't working out for him, so he just switched over to demons and witches and things like that. He actually claimed that the witches are throwing spells on him and making him sick and doing all those kind of things. This is the kind of craziness that is going on in churches, right? We're beginning to see, along with QAnon, a recycling of the old Satanic Panic from the late 70s and early 80s. And so we need to be sort of careful about this, that there are people pushing these conspiracy theories, and we need to call them out for it. Okay, so what is a witch? Well, the old classic definition of a witch is a person, especially a woman, who is credited with having unusually malignant supernatural powers. So that's the classic definition of a witch. That it's like an evil woman who's throwing hexes and spells on people. She turns your milk sour. She causes your cattle to die, those kind of things. That's the classic definition. But usually now when we're talking about witches, that's not what we're talking about. When you're talking about people who self-identify as a witch nowadays, that's not what we're talking about. All right? So a witch would be like a person who practices Wicca. Now, I've run into students who told me, oh yeah, I'm a Wiccan, I practice Wicca. I'm like, well, what exactly do you do? Like I like candles, like to help people. I like going, okay, I don't see like too much difference between you and like an Amway salesman, but that's okay. But there are people who practice Wicca. They take it seriously. This is what they do. Wicca is a type of paganism. So it comes out of that Western esoteric tradition, NeoPaganism, Wicca. Okay. Wicca is syncretic in that it combines different beliefs and practices from various religions. So you may run into a half a dozen people who claim to be Wiccan, but they're not going to believe the same thing. They'll have different beliefs that they've drawn from different esoteric traditions. Wicca was developed, modern day Wicca was developed in England in the beginning of the 20th century. So that would have been the 1900s. And it was popularized in the later half of the 20th century. And this is the guy who did it. This is Gerald Gardner, and he's sort of my hero. When I get old, I want to look like him. I want to dress like him and walk around campus looking like him. I think it'll help my image. He was actually an anthropologist, he was an archaeologist, okay, and he was a civil servant. So he pretty much studied anthropology and archaeology, so he got into kind of hunting down the original sources of a lot of Western esotericism. And he would take different beliefs, and he kind of pushed them all together and mixed them together, and he sort of created what we now know as modern-day Wicca. He mixed what he believed was a pre-Christian witch cult with Rosicrucianism, ceremonial magic, and the writings of Aleister Crowley. Crowley, of course, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. So he kind of took all this Western esotericism, mixed it together, and kind of created Wicca. I put a pre-Christian witch cult in quotes. And the reason why there used to be this theory that before Christianity began, there was sort of this religion of witches, and that Christianity wiped them out. Unfortunately, that theory has been disproven. It's not a real theory. It didn't actually happen that way. But there were people who believed it, and he kind of took some of the ideas from the writings from back then and kind of mixed them all together. Wiccan beliefs are drawn from a variety of sources across the ages. So from antiquity, the Middle Ages, and the Renaissance, and the modern period. Again, all this Western esotericism from all these different time periods that draws different ideas. That's why sometimes when you talk to a Wiccan and you say, well, you know, you were kind of given birth in the early 1900s, really popularized in about the 1950s. They're like, no, my tradition stems all the way back before Christ. And it's like, yeah, some of the ideas came from there, but really kind of how it's all put together and practiced nowadays, 1950s. Okay? But no, they do have some ideas that have gone through Western esotericism all throughout this time period. Good witches and bad witches. There's Glinda. Hi, Glinda. The Wicked Witch of the West. Are there good witches and are there bad witches? If you ask a Wiccan, you say, you know, are you a wicked witch? They'll probably tell you, no, I'm a good witch. I practice white magic. I don't practice black magic. And you're like, well, what's the difference? It's all evil, right? If you talk to Greg Locke, you know, somebody were to tell him, oh, I'm a white witch, he'd say, no, it's all satanic. It's all evil, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about kind of the different branches of Wicca, of witchcraft. There's theurgy, which are rituals which are practiced and associated with the invocation of the presence of one or more deities with the goal of achieving unity with the divine and perfecting oneself. This was a lot of the Western esotericism. The Hermetic group that was associated with the Golden Dawn, right? That particular group, that's what they were trying to do. They were trying to contact various deities and join with them so they could gain their wisdom and their knowledge and their power. This is what they were trying to do. Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, right? That's what they were trying to do, was to make contact with them and then merge with them in a sense. So there are those who are trying to do that. They're trying to summon up various deities. You'll see this in the writings of like H.P. Lovecraft, where they're trying to do this. And then there's what we call practical magic. And this is your white magic. This is like, oh, I'm trying to cast love spells or wealth spells or healing spells. I'm trying to bless people. I'm trying to do these kind of things. And then black magic, where they had 7 forbidden arts. And they would cast curses and things like that. If you're wondering what the 7 forbidden arts are, the first one is necromancy. And then there's also palm reading, right? Using sand to tell the future, using fire to tell the future, using water to tell the future, using air to tell the future, and I don't remember what the 7th one was, but it had to do with the future. So, but anyway, there were 7 forbidden arts, and these were considered black magic, but it's supposedly about curses and hexes and doing all those kind of things. All right, so those are your Wiccans, and as we can tell, you can't find 2 Wiccans who probably believe exactly the same thing. Let's move on to your Satanist. Devil worshiping. Now, the entire history of Christianity is full of groups accusing each other of devil worship. you worship the devil, you worship the devil, right? And a lot of times it's just kind of a convenient way of saying you're a heretic or you're a blasphemer or something like that. So we can go back and we can see that Protestantism, right? Those of us who are non-Catholic, okay, we were accused of being a satanic conspiracy against the church. We're there to divide the church. We're there to destroy the church. We're there to teach false doctrine. We're there to spread lies. We're a whole bunch of heretics. We're like the father of lies. It's all a satanic conspiracy. So all 27,000 denominations of Christianity have been accused of devil worship. Okay? And of course, on the other hand, all the Protestants say, well, the Pope is the Antichrist, so you're all worshiping the devil too, and you're all devil worshipers as well. So you have a long history of accusing everybody of devil worship. So when Greg Locke stands up on stage and says there's witches and they're worshiping the devil and they're doing all this evil stuff, he's just following Christian tradition of what we've always done. Anybody we disagree with, we just call you a devil worshiper and move on. Modern-day Satanism, on the other hand, can be traced to Anton LaVey in 1966. This is modern Satanism, not the old stuff that they accused everybody of. You're a witch, you're a warlock, you're a sorcerer, you're worshiping the devil. Not all the old stuff. This is the modern-day stuff. Modern-day stuff, 1966, Anton LaVey in San Francisco. There's a picture of him. To say that Anton LaVey was sort of a colorful character in San Francisco is definitely an understatement. He did a lot of interesting stuff. He used to play the Wurlitzer organ for a local theater. He was a carnival barker at one point, so he worked in the carnivals. He would walk around San Francisco in unusual outfits and do strange things. He apparently had a leopard that he walked on a leash, and he'd walk around San Francisco with it. He was an interesting showman, so to say. And he's the one who wrote the Satanic Bible. He's the one who kind of created modern-day Satanism. And a lot of people kind of wonder, is modern-day Satanism, this LaVey style of Satanism, is it really just kind of a parody, kind of a satire? Is it to be taken seriously at all, what he's doing? Never one for theory, this is a quote, never one for theory, LaVey created a belief system somewhere between religion, philosophy, psychology, and carnival or circus, freely appropriating science, mythology, fringe beliefs, and play in a potent mix. The core goal was always indulgence and vital existence based on the devices and desires of the self-made man. This comes from an article called The Black Pope and the Church of Satan, okay, and it appeared in The Devil's Party, Satanism, and Modern Energy. So when people kind of study LaVey and what he created, they're like, he was just kind of really just enjoying himself. And that's sort of what modern-day Satanism is all about. Enjoy yourself. It should be self-indulgent. It should be self-focused. So the Church of Satan, as created by LaVey, is one of self-indulgence and self-interest. So the biggest holiday in this sort of LaVey form of Satanism is your birthday, because it's all about you. There's no high holy day, it's not Halloween, it's your birthday, because it's all about you. He plagiarized ideas from Friedrich Nietzsche, that's your Übermensch, your Superman, also used to kind of promote Aryanism and white nationalism. Okay, Ayn Rand, who's very much into self-interest, H.L. Mencken, social Darwinism, Ragnar Redbeard, which is probably a pseudonym, Might is Right, John Dee's Enochian Keys, and H.P. Lovecraft, who wrote horror stories. So he just took whatever sounded good, threw it in there, and said, there it is. So a lot of people are like, I think he was just kind of joking, and a lot of people weren't in on the joke. But sure enough, you have sort of this LaVey style of Satanism. Now, let me just kind of say there is a modern-day Church of Satan as well, but they don't necessarily follow LaVey's form of Satanism. And they actually do some interesting work. Sometimes I look at them and I'm going, kind of glad you're around, because they do a lot of work about religious freedom. So they're like, okay, if you want to put the 10 Commandments in a public space, we want a statue of Bahamut in the public space, because freedom of religion. If you're saying it's okay for football coaches to lead Christian prayers at a football game, we'd like to send a satanic priest out and lead the football players in a satanic prayer. And so they're doing a lot to kind of defend, right, the separation of church and state to make sure that no one particular religion ever takes over everything. So in that sense, I think they're doing good work. Are they just doing satire as well? Like the Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster? Hard to tell. Like Discordianism? Hard to tell. Because sometimes people fall into these satires, these parodies, these jokes, and don't realize it and take it a little too seriously. Now, Satanic Panics. The entire history of Christianity is full of various groups labeling other groups as Satan worshipers. And some of these Satanic Panics go far back into antiquity. And I can pretty much guarantee you there's the same lie that is told over and over again. And as soon as I hear it, I'm like, oh, here we go again. And trust me, it's always about the children. There's an ancient lie, and it goes back even before Christianity, the blood libel lie. And one of the earliest targets of it was the ancient Jews, that they were kidnapping children and drinking their blood. And this has been leveled against every society and every possible group that you can imagine. And if you go to QAnon conspiracy today, they're going to tell you there's an evil cabal of Satanistic, liberal Democrats, and they're like kidnapping children, and they're sexually exploiting them, and they're cannibalizing them. One of the big theories that I heard in QAnon is they're extracting androchrome from them so they can inject it and keep themselves young. And a lot of us would be like, well, that's androchrome. Where'd that come from? You know where that came from? The writings of Hunter S. Thompson, who you can't trust at all for any kind of fact. If you're trusting Hunter S. Thompson, you're trusting an alcoholic addict, gonzo journalist who wrote just whatever he felt like at the moment because he needed to turn the article in. But the entire history of Christianity is just full of various groups labeling other groups within the church as Satan worshipers. The ancient concept of a witch was a woman in league with the devil. That oftentimes she would sell her soul to the devil, or she would have sexual intercourse with the devil, but she was working with the devil, not the modern idea of Wicca today. And so when you're talking about modern Wiccans today and you say you're devil worshipers, they're going to be like, no, we're not. I don't worship the devil. They might worship Mother Earth. They might worship nature, like an animistic religion. Again, defining who's a Wiccan and what their belief is, it's not easy to do because they have so many different beliefs. All right, the supernatural 70s. This is an actual sociological term, the supernatural 70s. Apparently something happened in the 70s, and we all got very, very interested in Satanism. We got very, very interested in witchcraft. We got very interested in all this kind of crazy supernatural stuff going on. Okay, rise of interest and media depictions in Satan and witchcraft. Let's take a look at these. Rosemary's Baby, that's be the late 60s. Okay? This was kind of the idea that there were satanic cults hidden in America, and they're working behind the scenes. The Exorcist. This is that movie that scared everybody in '74. There's reports of people vomiting and fainting and passing out during the showing of this movie because it was so intense. Nowadays, if our kids watch this, they're like, can we change the channel? It's kind of boring, right? The Omen, yes, the Antichrist is walking the earth. And I think part of the reason that we got so involved in all of this supernatural stuff is because if you look at what's happening in the church during that time, one, we had a message of dispensationalism and end times just being fed to us constantly. When Israel became a nation in 1968, we were all predicting that within one generation, 20 years, Jesus would return. And so the big prediction was that in 1988, Jesus would return. And suddenly we're all about the end times and the rise of the Antichrist and all this supernatural movement supposedly going on. And at the same time that that's happening, we have the rise of the charismatic movement and all their emphasis on spiritual gifts and spiritual warfare. And so these two forces kind of combine in American culture, and we're really beginning to push out this supernatural 70s. And of course, we had all those crazy hippies in the 60s doing their drugs and doing all their weird stuff. They must be evil. They must be Satanists. There's something going on with them. And then to kind of move it all along too, we begin to get, in the 80s, heavy metal. You guys remember heavy metal? Well, of course, they used a lot of this sort of supernatural, sort of, devil-worshipping imagery, pentagrams turned upside down, goats, all this kind of stuff. Why? Because it sold. This is what people were interested in. This is what people were paying money for. They'd go see these kinds of movies. This was what was popular at the time, so they just adapted that imagery to sell. It was just a way of advertising themselves and making more money. And I always think the funniest thing about it, the whole heavy metal look that everybody was dressing in, with all the leather and the studs, all that kind of stuff, that was all patterned after the lead singer of Judas Priest. He's the one who started it. And when you ask him about it, why did you dress that way? He'll tell you, well, I'm a gay man who was into the S&M scene. That's why I dressed that way. So here we had this entire generation dressing up like gay men going to S&M bars, and it's like, you're not Satanists, you're just kinky. Anyway, so we had the movies going on, right? Then we had the books. The books. This is Doreen Irvine from Witchcraft to Christ. She's described as one of the many witches who switched, the witch who switched. So she switched from witchcraft to Christ. And this is one of those stories that just, the evangelicals and the charismatics ate up this story. She claimed that in her little village in England, there were thousands of witches, and they would get together and hold these huge ceremonies. And guess what they were doing, of course? They were sacrificing children. And in fact, they were, forcing young girls to have sex with devils and to have sex with sex with men to produce babies so they could sacrifice them, blah, 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 on it goes. She concocted the whole story. There is no evidence, no proof whatsoever. It's just another one of these phony testimonies that came out and people ate it up. And of course, if one book is successful, how about a different one? This one is actually called The Witch That Switched. This is Irene Arlington Park. And she's the same thing. I was a witch. I was raised in this coven. There's thousands of them everywhere. We hold these huge ceremonies. The girls are forced to give birth to babies, which we sacrifice or eat or do whatever we do to them. Or how about Mike Warnke, the Satan seller? Had a huge career selling his testimony that he was a former head of a satanic coven. He was the high priest of a satanic coven, and he did all these things, none of which were true. Cornerstone magazine, a Christian magazine, did an expose of him where they showed, hey, there is no way that he did all of these things. If you look at the timeline of his life and what he claims in his book, they don't match up. When he claims he was out here doing this or that, he was actually, in the military. And they did an expose of him. But he's still working the evangelical circuit. Over and over again, these stories, these testimonies, nobody ever researched them. Nobody ever verified them. They just took them at face value. Why? Because this is the kind of stuff they wanted to hear. Okay, I've talked about William Snowball several times. This guy's been everything. Oh, he was a priest who practiced satanic rituals like all priests do. He was a Catholic priest who did all this terrible stuff. He was a druid. He was a high priest of the Satanic Church. He was all this other stuff all at the same time. It's like, when you look at his story, it's just not possible. But you know what charismatic churches, you know what evangelical churches love? A big old fancy conversion story. We love that stuff. We eat it up. I was all messed up on drugs and Satan. Now I'm all messed up on Jesus. We buy this stuff. We pay money to go hear these people speak. And they make a fortune off of it. And the people who publish these books, even though they're published by supposed Christian labels, Christian publishing houses, they're owned by secular publishing houses, each and every one of them. And they publish these because they make money. It's not within their own self-interest to tell the truth. John Todd, this guy was all over television in the 70s. Okay, he was supposedly also this huge, warlock, witch, whatever. And he became a Christian, right? He was a warlock, and then he was a Christian, then he went back to being a warlock, and now he's a Christian. He just keeps changing to whatever will, pay the bills at the moment. Oh yes, and what would life be without a chick track? Jack Chick. I think this guy has done more damage to Christianity than any other human being in the world. He put out all these little tracts. Are Roman Catholics Christians? Because he'll show you how it's actually ancient pagan, Babylonian religion. It's just a rebirth of the Babylonian religion, and they're all Satanists anyway. Where did he get his information? From a fraud who claimed to have been a Catholic priest. That's Bahamut. That's one of his little tracts about Satanism. Where did he get his information? From a fake Satanist. Bewitched. Again, this is all about fake Satanist information. And then he even put out full-scale comic books. Alberto, that's his source for a lot of his Catholic priests are actually Satanist. Angel of Light, that's from your false Satanists. The Broken Cross. Broken Cross, of course, is what? You guys know what the broken cross is? It's the peace sign. It's an inverted cross that's broken. And if you trace back where that little rumor came from, that comes from the John Birch Society. I actually have a copy of their material that they sent out to promote this. It's one of those odd little pieces of ephemera that I've collected over the years. But all of this stuff just helped fuel the Satanic Panic. And we began to believe it. But this is the book. 1980. Michelle remembers. It's the book that came up with a conspiracy of a global satanic cult that includes the wealthy and the powerful, the world elite, in which children are abducted or bred for human sacrifices, pornography, and prostitution. And this kicked off the Satanic Panic into high gear, and not one word of it is true. It would culminate in the McMartin preschool trials, where children were claiming, oh yeah, we were taken into secret tunnels. Guess what? There are no secret tunnels under that preschool. We were flying, and they were doing this, and they were doing that. We played naked games and all this other stuff. And they found out that the very techniques they were using to ask children questions were leading questions, and it was more about the therapists acting out their own stuff, trying to get these kids to say this stuff, and the kids were trying to please the adults and saying it. What a fiasco that was. It destroyed people's lives. Michelle remembers. But stop right now, QAnon, and look at what this is. A global satanic cult that includes the wealthy and powerful world elite in which children are abducted or bred for human sacrifices, pornography, and prostitution. That's just your whole QAnon theory kicked up again. All we did was recycle old nonsense that has already been disproven. So there you are, right? QAnon. QAnon, really, if I were to talk about QAnon, it's nothing but recycled anti-Semitism mixed in with the old Satanic Panic. And a whole lot of white nationalism, Aryanism. For those that are not openly Nazis, because we need to stop calling the far religious right and the far political right just, the political right. We need to actually call them what they are, Nazis. It's just those who are not openly Nazi, they have no idea where all this stuff comes from, but it just feeds into stuff that they want to hear. It's a lot of confirmation bias. So, having heard this about pagans and witches and Satanists and all this kind of stuff, and seeing how crazy the whole world is out there and all these satanic panics that went on, how do you live it out? First off, don't panic. None of this has ever been proven real. None of it. None of it. The FBI in the 80s put out a report about all these supposed, satanic ritual abuse and all this other stuff, and they couldn't find any evidence of it whatsoever. Well, that just means they're part of the conspiracy. You can't trust the FBI, you can't trust the government. So I'm just supposed to trust some crazy guy who posts on 8chan? I don't think so. I'd like to see a little bit of evidence. Because when you go through all those books that I pulled up for you from the 70s and the 80s, not one of those stories is true. When you hear a fantastic story like that, first thing I want is evidence. You're saying that tens of thousands of Satanists gathered in this little tiny village out in the middle of England? Where's the leftover evidence of that? If 10,000 people descend upon a village, somebody's going to notice. They don't go unnoticed. Somebody in that village would have went, hey, there's 10,000 people standing out there. Or where'd all these cars come from? Or how come all the restaurants and the hotels are full? Or at least there should be some RVs out there or something. There should be some evidence left behind. I don't think they cleaned up them after themselves that well. Well, that just shows you, how deep this conspiracy goes, that they're able to clean up after themselves and not leave any evidence. The fact that there is no evidence is evidence that there's a conspiracy. Okay, you've just gone over the deep edge. Don't panic, people. Christians need to stop spreading conspiracies and focus on the truth. We are so sidetracked with all this nonsense. We're so sidetracked about Satanists breeding children. We are so sidetracked with witches in our churches. We're so far off about, this global elite conspiracy that's taking over our government. We are so sidetracked with this nonsense that we no longer focus upon the truth and what we were taught by Christ. This takes both scholarship and good teaching. And this is why I fear for the American church. Because ever since the original Great Awakening was a rejection of scholarship, was a rejection, kind of like this anti-intellectual bent of American Christianity. Oh, well, you can't trust any of those people with their fancy degrees. They've all been brainwashed by the liberal elites in the colleges and universities. They have even gotten into our seminaries. They warn us, don't go to seminary, you'll lose your faith. No, you'll lose the brainwashing, is what you'll lose. We need scholarship and good teaching to get through all of this. But here's the real question we should be asking. When we run into somebody who says, hey, I'm a pagan, or I'm a Wiccan, or I'm a Satanist, we need to stop and ask ourselves a very important question. When they say that, what need is being fulfilled in their life? Why do they feel that being a pagan, or being a Wiccan, or being a Satanist fulfills a certain need within their life? We don't do things for no reason. We do things because they fulfill and satisfy certain needs in our life. You go to the root of any addiction, and there's a need that's being fulfilled. People seek to fulfill the needs in their life. So when they say they're a pagan, a Wiccan, a Satanist, what need is being fulfilled in their life? Conspiracy theories fulfill a need for meaning in an often random and chaotic world. There's just stuff in this world that doesn't make sense. How in the world can an airplane crash and disappear? We don't see it. Must be a conspiracy theory behind it. I heard they saw a flash of light beforehand. Must have been aliens. Right. Our brain wants to make sense of our chaotic world. And so we come up with these crazy theories. It answers the question, why do bad things happen to good people? Why do good parents have their child kidnapped and child disappears? Must be part of a satanic elite. No. Because sometimes bad things just happen to good people. It's a random world. We wish that it wasn't, but that's the reality. We like to see things clearly as heroes and villains. These are the heroes, these are the villains. It makes sense for us. It's very black and white. We would like the world to be that way, clear cut. We would love it if all the heroes wore white and all the villains wore black, and then we could identify them very easily. But people are much more complex than that. All of us have heroic traits, and all of us have villainous traits within us. What need is being fulfilled? Conspiracy theories can be propaganda tools, weaponized to harm groups of people for personal or political gain. All during the church, ancient history, all the way up to modern history of the church, we've weaponized calling people Satan worshipers. We've weaponized you devil worshiper to silence people that we disagree with. I think that's what Pastor Greg Locke is doing. He says there's 6 witches in this church. He doesn't give their names. He doesn't point them out. Some of you are sitting right here. And trust me, if anybody ever disagrees with him, all he's got to do is, and that's one of them. And he silenced any opposition. Political gain? Well, they're just, the liberal elite. They're involved in a child pornography ring being run out of a basement of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C. It's just political mud being slung, and people eat it up because they want to. What need is being fulfilled? Why do people turn to paganism, Wicca, or Satanism? What need is being fulfilled? People turn to paganism, Wicca, and Satanism because Christianity has failed to provide meaning, belonging, and moral guidance. Let me say that again because you need to hear that. People turn to paganism, Wicca, and Satanism because Christianity has failed to provide meaning, belonging, and moral guidance. We're out there doing all kinds of other crazy stuff. We're too political. We're too anti-everything. We've just kind of messed things up, and people have rejected the church because they can no longer find meaning within the church. They can't find meaning to their lives. They can't find purpose in their lives within the church anymore. Come in, sit down, shut up, put your check in the little offering bag as it comes by. Don't question me, and you'll get to heaven. That's all there is to it. Oh yeah, and don't forget, you need to vote Republican. And you need to be anti-this, anti-that, anti-this, anti-that, anti-this, anti-that. Sense of belonging, do we truly have belonging to our communities nowadays? Our communities are so fragmented. I talk to people, they're like, I have like 8,000 Facebook friends. I'm like, really? Which one's going to come bail you out at 3 o'clock in the morning? Are they really your friends? Because I know that if I were to be arrested, and I had to be bailed out at 3 o'clock in the morning, my friend would probably be in the cell with me. We'd have to call one of our parents or something. Do we really have friends? Do we really have a close-knit social group that we can depend upon? Do we have belonging? What happens when you leave your church? Suppose you go from this church to another church. You know what happens to you? A lot of people call it getting ghosted. I like to call it when you leave a church, you get holy ghosted. You just sort of, all those people who were your friends, who you ate lunch with all the time, who you spent time with, who you socialized all the time with, they're just gone. They're not one of us anymore. So did we ever truly belong to each other then? Do we ever really have a sense of belonging to each other? And what about moral guidance? Do we actually offer positive values that people can follow, or just a whole bunch of anti-everything? We failed. And this is why people are turning to other things to find answers. Because they're looking for meaning, they're looking for purpose, they're looking for belonging, they're looking for moral guidance. That's what they're looking for. And if we can't provide it, they will go elsewhere to look for it. Matthew 7, verses 1 through 5 say this: "Do not judge, so that you may not be judged. For the judgment you give will be the judgment you get, and the measure you give will be the measure you get. Why do you see the speck in your neighbor's eye, but do not notice the log in your own eye? Or how can you say to your neighbor, 'Let me take that speck out of your eye,' while the log is in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the log out of your own eye, and then you will see clearly to take the speck out of your neighbor's eye." Stop policing the world. That's not our job as the church. That is not our job as a Christian, to go out to the world, to people who are not within the church, to go out to the world to people who are not Christians and say, "You need to clean up your act. Let me tell you how you're supposed to live. Let me pass some laws to force you to live that way." That's not what we're supposed to do. You know what you need to do? You need to stop policing the world, go home and sanctify your own heart. Because there are a whole bunch of people sitting in churches today whose hearts are evil. They have hatred within their heart, hatred towards their neighbors, hatred towards all these supposed enemies that they're surrounded by. And they spew out lie after lie as conspiracy theories. Go home and sanctify your own heart. Remove the log from your own eye. Because once you start going out to the world and you start judging them, guess what's going to happen? They're going to judge you right back the same way, and you'll come up a hypocrite. Oftentimes, I find it's the atheists and the pagans and the Wiccans who are more moral, who have better ethics than many of the Christians I run into, and will treat you better. If we don't deal with the abuse, and I'm talking physical and mental abuse, the sexual abuse, the hypocrisy, and the injustice within the church, and when I'm talking injustice, I'm talking patriarchy. I'm talking anything that makes any person within the church a second-class citizen. If being a woman makes you a second-class citizen, that's injustice. It's like the Southern Baptist Convention. They just kicked out Saddleback Church because they ordained women as pastors. And I love their little dodge that they just did. Here's what they said. We don't oppose the ordination of women. We just oppose women being pastors. What? If we don't stop practicing injustice, where we say things like, well, everybody's a sinner. Everybody's a sinner. We're all sinners. We're all sinners saved by grace. Yeah, well, that couple over there who's remarried, you treat them as second-class citizens because they're remarried. Or that single mom over there who had a child out of wedlock, you treat her like a second-class citizen. She can't teach a Sunday school class. She had a child out of wedlock. You treat her like a second-class citizen. Or the LGBTQ plus community that may come into your church, suddenly they're second-class citizens. We can't let them have any kind of leadership, right? They're continuing on in a sinful lifestyle. Maybe, church, you should go home and start examining your pastors a little bit closer. As one after another is accused of mental, physical, sexual abuse within the church, financial improprieties, drug addictions, alcohol addictions. Your pastors are doing exactly these same things, but when they do it, well, I asked God to forgive me and now it's okay. And we stick them right back into ministry. That's injustice within the church, folks. If we don't deal with the abuse, the sexual abuse, the hypocrisy, and the injustice in the church, it will continue to decline, and we're going to find people leave to go chase paganism and Wicca and Satanism because they're like, you know what? At least these people are honest. They're not the hypocrites that I find within the church. Oh, but you know, you can't leave church just because it's full of hypocrites. Every church is full of hypocrites. Well, then do something about it. Address the issue. Don't dismiss it. Well, this is my imaginary interlocutor. This is Mabel once again. She's going to tell me off and tell me why I'm completely wrong. I'm trying to love people by telling them how evil they are, and that if they are going to go to hell if they don't change. I'm saving them from hell. That's love. No, Mabel, you still got a log in your eye, and you're trying to take the speck out of their eye. That's what's going on. Maybe you should try listening to them and hearing their needs. When you run into somebody who's a pagan, listen to them. Listen to their story. Find out about them. Find out who they are. Create a relationship with them. Not a missionary relationship where I'm trying to convert them and get them to come to my church. But a true, genuine friendship. Find out about them. Listen to them. Hear their needs. And then show them how Christ fulfills their needs. Well, how do you show them? You are the voice of Christ. You are the hands of Christ in this world today. You, as a Christian representing Christ, should be helping to fulfill their needs. To show it. not just talk about it, not just to stand in judgment over there, wagging your little finger over them, but to actually show them love, to be the light of the world. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works. Not your good sermon, not your cut and paste Bible verse, not the bumper sticker on your car, not your little piece of Christian bling bling that you wear around your neck, but your good works, and glorify your Father which is in heaven. That's what we need to be doing, showing that Christianity is a place of belonging and has meaning and can show you the purpose of your life. That's what we need to be doing. If you found this content helpful, please like this video. Share your comments with us below. I'd love to hear from you. What do you have to say? Have you run into pagans? Have you run into people who practice Wicca? Have you run into people who claim to be Satanists? What were they like? What was your encounter like? Tell me all about it. I'd love to hear it. It helps our community as well as our YouTube channel, so thank you for that. Let me now close in prayer. Join me as we pray. Heavenly Father, help us to remove the log from our own eye before we begin to judge those who have labeled themselves pagans, Wiccans, Satanists. Let us encounter them with love. Let us listen to what they have to say. Let us hear their stories. Let us accept them into our lives as human beings with needs. Help us to find out what those needs are, and then to fulfill those needs as a representative of Christ. Help us share the truth that Christ can fulfill all their needs. Help us to stop being so judgmental. Help us to stop being so hypocritical. Help us to clean up our own churches before we decide that we have the right to clean up the world. We pray this in your name. Amen. I'll probably get some angry comments about how I'm making light of these very serious satanic conspiracies going on. Don't bother getting all mad at me because I'm making light of these fake satanic conspiracies. You get all mad at me because I'm calling them fake. Unless you have real evidence. Do you have real evidence? Questions are not evidence. Why was Hillary Clinton in Washington, D.C. when that child went missing from Iowa? It's because she was trafficking him to that pizza parlor. That's why. Okay, that's just a question. That's not evidence. Real evidence, real evidence. Let me give you an example. Mike Warnke claims that he caused all his followers to chop off part of their finger. You bring that guy in with his finger missing and an affidavit saying and proving that he was with Mike Warnke at that time, and Mike Warnke actually did it, maybe then I'll believe you. Did you know people just like to post lies and will repeat a lot of these things because it gives them a sense of belonging to a community? That's why so many people are into QAnon. It gives them a sense of belonging because the church has failed to give a sense of belonging. So they join this community, they just repost and pass on all these lies. They know they're not true, but it lets them belong. I better close with a benediction before I go off on a long tangent here. Let me close with this benediction. As you leave this place, may you seek to understand your neighbor. May you be a light that attracts instead of a noise that drives away. May others see Christ in you. God bless you all. Go in peace. You are dismissed.
We are one in Christ, we are one in God, we are one in unity. We are one in truth, we are one in faith, we are one eternally. Everyone is welcome here, everyone is welcome